It was 5 a.m. along the windswept Normandy coast when Oberleutnant Zuri Walter Olmsen raised his binoculars toward the sea. The faint light of dawn trembled across the waves, and what he saw through that glass would scar his memory forever. The English Channel, once Germany's trusted moat, had transformed into a living machine. From horizon to horizon, ships filled the ocean like an endless city of steel. It was not an invasion. It was a flood of metal, a force so vast that the human mind could barely register its scale. Across that dark expanse moved 6,939 vessels, warships, landing craft, merchant carriers, a floating continent of destruction. Nearly 200,000 sailors from 8 allied nations sailed toward Fortress Europe, each wave carrying a promise that history was about to be rewritten. At precisely 5:52 a.m., Olmsen's battery received the order to fire. 3 minutes later, the first 210 mm checkmate shells arced across the morning sky, vanishing into the haze. They struck water like pebbles thrown at a hurricane. For a brief moment, Olmsen's men tasted victory when their guns found the USS Corey, the only American destroyer lost that day. But as smoke cleared, his heart sank. The Armada kept coming. Battleships like the USS Nevada and cruisers like the USS Tuscaloosa shrugged off the bombardment and pressed forward. From his concrete observation post, Olmsen became the first German officer to engage the largest invasion force ever assembled, and the first to realize what it truly meant. What he saw through that Zeiss rangefinder was not just an enemy. It was the physical embodiment of industrial supremacy. The mathematics of defeat were sailing toward him at 8 knots. Germany's high command had promised the channel was impenetrable. Yet before sunrise, thousands of Allied vessels proved otherwise. Across the Normandy front, officers reported the same impossible sight. They had prepared for a battle. What they faced instead was an industrial avalanche. At Army Group B headquarters, Lieutenant General Hans Speidel received frantic reports. Parachute drops, explosions, broken communication lines. Over 13,000 American paratroopers had already fallen behind enemy lines, carried by hundreds of Douglas C-47s that darkened the skies. Field Marshal Rommel, ironically, was hundreds of miles away, celebrating his wife's birthday. He had believed the weather too poor for an invasion. But nature had turned, and fate had chosen its hour. Veterans of the Eastern Front, like General Erich Marx, knew immediately what this meant. They had fought in Russia's frozen hell and believed they had seen everything war could offer. Yet even they couldn't imagine this, a storm of men and machines powered not by courage alone, but by the assembly lines of Detroit, Liverpool, and Philadelphia. Vice Admiral Friedrich Ruge had inspected every defense, every bunker, every minefield along the coast. He had begged for reinforcements. Now, standing by his maps, he realized the truth. They had prepared for the last war. The Allies had brought the next one. At 5:30 a.m., the sea erupted in thunder. 5 battleships, 20 cruisers, and 65 destroyers unleashed their fury in a coordinated bombardment. The USS Texas alone fired 255 shells in the first hour, more explosive weight than some entire German divisions held in reserve. Concrete bunkers cracked open, gun emplacements vanished under flame and dust. Then the sky joined the assault. Not dozens of aircraft, not hundreds, but 14,000. From the beaches of Omaha to the fields of Cannes, the roar of Allied bombers drowned every sound of human resistance. The Luftwaffe managed only 319 sorties across France that day. For every German plane, 46 Allied aircraft filled the sky. The difference wasn't strategy, it was production. At 6:30 a.m., as American soldiers of the 1st and 29th Divisions charged Omaha Beach, German gunners opened fire. Bullets ripped through the first waves, bodies fell by the hundreds, and for a fleeting instant, it seemed the Atlantic Wall might hold. But by 8 a.m., when American destroyers moved within 1,000 yards of the shore, defying orders, grounding themselves in shallow water, the tide turned. Their guns roared at point-blank range, annihilating the German strongpoints one by one. Olmsen, watching from his post, understood at last. The Allies didn't just possess superior numbers. They possessed a new philosophy of war. To them, ships were not treasures, they were tools. For every vessel lost, 10 more waited behind it. By midday, the horizon disappeared completely. The sea, once Germany's greatest defense, had become a factory floor, producing victory one wave at a time. The defenders of Normandy had not merely encountered soldiers. They had collided with an idea that war could be fought and won through the relentless logic of production. And as the guns thundered on, one truth became clear. The Thousand-Year Reich had met its reckoning, not through heroism or betrayal, but through the cold, unstoppable mathematics of industrial warfare. By the evening of June 6th, the sun dipped low behind the smoke-filled channel, painting the sky in shades of crimson and ash. For the German commanders, the horizon no longer marked safety. It marked defeat creeping closer with every wave. General Marx's headquarters near Cannes trembled under the roar of distant artillery. Reports were coming in from every sector. The Allies were pouring through the gaps like water through shattered glass. The coastal defense network, once praised as unbreakable, was collapsing under its own myth. In the chaos, messages flooded Berlin. Rommel's staff tried desperately to locate him, but the field marshal was still miles away, stranded by Allied airstrikes. His car raced through burning villages, flames licking the night sky as he struggled to return to a battle already lost. Every road was bombed, every bridge gone, and every field turned into a graveyard of steel. The Reich had built walls of concrete, but the Allies had built wings that spanned oceans and rained precision death from above. Across the channel, on the deck of the USS Augusta, General Dwight D. Eisenhower stood quietly watching the unfolding storm. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. The operation he had gambled his entire reputation on was now shaping history itself. Behind him, maps glowed under red lamps, pins moving inland from the beaches. The Allied forces had secured their bridgehead. Normandy was bleeding, but it was theirs. For the first time in years, hope returned to Europe's shadowed heart. In villages long buried under Nazi rule, church bells began to ring again. Farmers peeked from cellars as American, British, and Canadian troops marched past fields that had known nothing but silence and fear. Liberation was not yet victory, but it was the first breath after drowning. Still, the cost was staggering. More than 10,000 Allied soldiers lay dead or wounded by nightfall. Omaha Beach had turned into a red tide of sacrifice. Yet every man who fell became part of a story far greater than himself. A story that declared tyranny had limits, and freedom, no matter how battered, would always rise again. At the same time, deep within Germany, the industrial war machine was faltering. Factories bombed to rubble, oil fields set ablaze, rail lines cut apart. The lifeblood of the Wehrmacht was drying up. Hitler still believed he could push them back into the sea, still shouted orders from his bunker as if words could resurrect broken armies. But reality had outgrown his delusions. The war had evolved beyond him. This was no longer about generals or strategy. This was about machines, production, and the relentless rhythm of modern warfare. In the air, Allied bombers moved like storm clouds, vast, unending, mechanical. Cities like Rouen, Cannes, and Cherbourg became points on a map erased by fire. The German flak gunners fought with courage, but courage was no match for mathematics. For every bomber they brought down, 100 more followed. Each wave of planes carried not just bombs, but the weight of a world that refused to live under tyranny. By mid-June, the Allies had brought ashore over 1 million men, 500,000 vehicles, and countless tons of supplies. The beaches once guarded by German artillery now buzzed like colossal factories, with cranes, bulldozers, and engineers building new ports from nothing. The sea that had once divided continents had become their greatest highway. Rommel finally reached the front lines, and for a moment, the Desert Fox saw what he had always feared. Germany had been outthought, outproduced, and outpaced. He ordered a retreat, but it was too late. His armored divisions were already crippled by airstrikes. Tanks that once roared across Africa now smoldered in the hedgerows of Normandy. In the months that followed, the Allies pushed inland, through France, through Belgium, toward the heart of Germany. Each village taken was another nail in the coffin of the Reich. The soldiers who had landed in terror on D-Day now moved with the weight of destiny. And behind them, the factories of Britain, Canada, and America never slept. Every bullet fired, every tank delivered, Every ration pact was a silent promise that this time, freedom would not fail. By May 1945, Berlin fell. Hitler's empire, built on fear and cruelty, vanished in smoke and rubble. The war that had begun with thunder and arrogance ended in silence. The soldiers who survived returned home not as conquerors, but as witnesses to the cost of ambition and the price of peace. And so, as history turned its page, one truth echoed across the ruins of Europe. Wars are not truly won on the battlefield. They are won in the minds that innovate, in the hands that build, and in the hearts that refuse to surrender. The Allies did not just invade Normandy, they invaded the future. And from that day on, the world would never fight the same way again.